The sun over the Hindu Kush was a brutal, white eye in the sky. Below, in a ragged valley known as the Devil's Anvil, the entire battle plan had disintegrated into chaos. 381 Navy SEALs and Afghan commandos were trapped, not by a dozen insurgents, but by a relentless, coordinated army of over 400 seasoned Taliban fighters. They were pinned in a hellish bowl, rocket-propelled grenades, and machine gun fire stitching the dust around them. The shrill calls for medevac cracking over the radio. Every exit was a kill zone. Every moment ticked closer to a mass casualty event, a disaster that would echo through history. And their only hope, their only chance for a miracle, was a single, unseen thread connecting them to a distant, wind-scoured ridge. There, lying perfectly still in the crushing silence above the storm of metal, was a 28-year-old woman from Texas. Her call sign was Ghost. In her world, the fate of 381 men would come down to one breath, one heartbeat, one shot. The mountain air was thin and carried a bite that seeped through even the thickest layers. Petty Officer First Class Lena, Ghost, Vance adjusted the focus ring on her scope, the world narrowing to a circle of clarity. Her position, a shallow scrape in the earth behind a jagged spine of rock, was nearly 2 kilometers from the valley below. From here, the frantic battle in the Devil's Anvil looked like a silent, chaotic puppet show. Puffs of smoke, tiny flashes of light, figures moving like ants under disturbance. But her radio earpiece told the true, horrific story. The voices were strained, professional, but edged with a tension she'd rarely heard. It was supposed to be a straightforward clearance operation. Intelligence suggested a medium-sized force. They were wrong, wildly wrong. Her spotter, Chief Doc Hendricks, lay beside her, his binoculars glued to his eyes. "Command net is burning up," he murmured, his voice flat. "They're completely surrounded. Taliban have the high ground on all 3 sides of the valley. They're using Russian DSHK heavy machine guns. Those things are tearing the MRAPs apart." Lena didn't respond. Her job was to be a separate entity, a detached eye, and a precise instrument. The emotional weight of 381 lives had to be compartmentalized, locked away in a steel box in her mind. If she opened it, even a crack, the shaking would start. And the shaking was death. Her mission today had been different. She and Doc were overwatch for a separate, smaller SEAL team investigating a suspected commander's compound north of the main force. That mission was scrubbed when all hell broke loose in the valley. Now, they were the only Allied asset with an elevated, unobstructed, though extremely long-range, view of the entire nightmare. The trapped joint force, a mix of SEALs from several teams, and their Afghan partners, was trying to consolidate a defensive perimeter. But the Taliban fire was too thick, too well-aimed. They were fish in a barrel. "Ghost, this is Eagle Actual." The voice of the SEAL Task Force commander crackled in her ear, cutting through the cacophony of other transmissions. He was down there, in the thick of it. "We cannot move. We cannot get air support in. The cloud cover is too low for fast movers, and the enemy fire is too intense for the birds. They're using the terrain like professionals. We need you to find their command and control. Find the puppeteers." "Roger, éaglectoile." Scanning, Lena whispered, her cheek resting against the stock of her .300 Winchester Magnum rifle. She began the painstaking search. It wasn't about shooting the guy with the biggest gun. It was about finding the brains. The man on the radio coordinating the ambush. The expert mortar team calculating distances. The heavy weapon team leader directing fire. She swept her scope across the opposing ridges. The Taliban fighters were disciplined, using natural cover expertly. She saw the heavy machine gun positions Doc mentioned, dug into rocky crevices. But they were just hands. She needed the head. Minutes stretched like hours. The reports from the valley grew more dire. Casualties mounting, ammunition running low. The frustration in the commander's voice was palpable. Lena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The sheer scale of the ambush was staggering. This was a planned, deliberate operation to wipe out an entire coalition task force. The weight in her steel box rattled. Then she saw it. An anomaly. On the central ridge, slightly back from the main firing line, was a small cluster of ruins, the remnants of an old shepherd's hut. Near it, a figure moved not with the frantic energy of a shooter, but with calm purpose. He wasn't firing. He was observing. He held binoculars, not a rifle. And every few moments, another fighter would run to him, crouch, receive what looked like instructions, and dart away to a different position. "Doc," Lena said, her voice low. "Ruins at 11 o'clock, 1,400 meters. See the man in the black vest, gray beard with binos." Doc shifted his glasses. "I see him. He's a talker. And look, to his left, 80 meters, see that natural trench line? There's a team setting up. That's not an RPG. That's a recoilless rifle." The recoilless rifle was a game changer, a direct fire cannon that could destroy their lightly armored vehicles with one hit. The team was expertly camouflaging it. "He's the sector commander," Lena concluded, "and that recoilless rifle is their key to breaching the perimeter. Aigle actual, Ghost. I have eyes on a probable enemy command node and a heavy weapon team preparing a recoilless rifle in a trench at grid." She read off the coordinates. "Can you engage?" The commander's voice was tight. Lena did the math in her head. The distance was extreme, nearly a mile and a half. The wind was variable, gusting down the valley. The shot would be at the very edge of her weapon's effective range, and, more importantly, at the edge of practical possibility. A miss wouldn't just waste time, it would reveal her position, and they'd lose their only eyes. "It's a very long shot, sir. High probability of miss. Recommend I wait for a better solution on the commander." She hated saying it, but professionalism demanded honesty. A burst of static, then a new, strained voice came on, a SEAL platoon leader from the valley floor. "Ghost, that recoilless rifle is pointed directly at my position. If they fire, they'll wipe out 20 men and our last working vehicle. We have no cover." The choice was no longer tactical. It was moral. She couldn't wait for the perfect shot. She had to try the impossible now. "Roger." Engaging recoilless rifle team. She took a deep breath, let it half out, and entered the zone. The world vanished. The cold, the fear for the men below, the ache in her muscles, all dissolved. There was only the crosshair, the gentle sway of the mirage heat waves rising from the valley, the feel of the wind on her neck. She calculated the bullet's arc, a parabola stretching into the impossible. She adjusted her scope for the monumental drop. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. The shot echoed across the mountains, a sharp crack that was swallowed by the vastness. Time slowed. Through the scope, she saw a puff of rock dust just above and to the right of the trench. A miss, but it was a near miss. The team below flinched, scrambling. They knew a sniper was targeting them, but from where? They looked down into the valley, not up at the distant ridge behind them. "Wind gust," Doc reported calmly. "Hold left. 1.5 mils. Lena cycled the bolt, the spent casing flying. She settled again. The rifle team was now frantic, trying to move the heavy weapon. The gunner was bent over, heaving. Lena's crosshair found the center of his back. She exhaled, held, squeezed. The second shot was identical to the first in sound, but its result was tragically different. The gunner jerked and collapsed over the tube of the rifle. The other two men froze for a split second, then grabbed their fallen comrade, dragging him away from the weapon, abandoning the position. "It," Doc said. "Recoilless rifle is neutralized." A faint sound that might have been a cheer crackled over the radio. It was small, one weapon down, but there were hundreds more. And now, the Taliban knew a sniper was in play. The clock was ticking faster. Lena had just stepped onto a high wire, and the net below was full of 381 men, depending on her not to fall. The silence after the second shot was heavier than the gunfire. In her scope, Lena watched the two surviving Taliban fighters drag their fallen comrade into a fold in the earth. The recoilless rifle, a sinister, long tube, lay abandoned in the trench. A tiny victory in an ocean of desperation. But the reaction across the enemy lines was immediate and intelligent. The volume of fire into the valley didn't diminish, but its character changed. She saw heads ducking, fighters pressing deeper into cover. They were searching, not down in the valley, but scanning the surrounding mountains. Her first shot had been a warning. Her second was a signature. Ghost was here. They know they have a sniper, Doc muttered, his binoculars sweeping the opposite ridges. They don't know where, but they're looking. Their command will be moving, getting more careful. He was right. Through her scope, Lena saw the man in the black vest, the sector commander, now crouched low behind the stone ruins. He was still talking, still directing, but he was using the wall as a shield. His head and shoulders were no longer visible. The shot she had wanted, a clean, decisive strike on the brain, was gone. Down in the valley, Eagle Actual came back on the net. His voice was grim, but held a new thread of urgency. Good effect, Ghost. You bought us a minute. But they're adjusting. We're hearing chatter on their frequency. They're talking about a Kamsazi, a sniper. They're trying to triangulate. You are now a priority target. Lena felt a cold trickle of sweat trace her spine. This was the sniper's paradox. The more effective you were, the more you painted a target on your own back. Her position, which had felt remote and safe minutes ago, now felt exposed. The distance that protected her also meant she had zero support if discovered. It was just her, Doc, and a lot of empty, hostile mountain. We need to relocate, she said quietly to document negative. Doc shook his head, not taking his eyes from his binos. Not yet. We're the only eyes Eagle has. If we move, we lose all visual on the command node and the heavy machine guns. We stay, but we go dark on comms unless absolutely necessary. Let them wonder. It was a risk, but it made sense. They would become ghosts in truth. For the next hour, Lena and Doc barely moved, barely spoke. They observed. She mapped the enemy positions in her mind, building a detailed picture of the kill zone. The 3 primary heavy machine gun nests. The RPG teams moving along preset routes. The mortar position, cleverly hidden in a dried-up creek bed. And the command node at the ruins, now buzzing with even more activity. The commander was still there, a persistent wasp in the hive. The situation in the valley, however, was deteriorating. The trap force was running critically low on ammunition. Medics were working in the open under fire, trying to stabilize the growing number of wounded. The cloud cover remained stubbornly low, preventing the high-altitude bombers that could turn the tide. The trapped men were fighting with incredible bravery, but bravery doesn't stop bullets. They were being slowly compressed. Then, a new crisis erupted. A team of SEALs and commandos, in a desperate attempt to secure a better defensive position, had become isolated on a small rocky knoll within the valley. They were cut off from the main body by a blistering crossfire from 2 of the DSHK machine gun nests. The radio traffic turned frantic. We're pinned. Completely pinned. We have 2 critically wounded. We cannot move. Lena swung her scope. She could see them, 8 tiny figures huddled behind rocks, dust kicking up all around them as the heavy caliber rounds impacted. The 2 machine guns had them in a perfect, murderous vice. Ghost, this is Eagle. You see that isolated team? The commander's voice was hard. I see them, sir. Those 2 Dushkas are going to wipe them out in minutes. Can you suppress them? Suppress a heavy machine gun with a sniper rifle? It was like trying to stop a truck by throwing pebbles at it. A direct hit on the gun itself was nearly impossible at this range, and the gunners were well protected behind sandbags and rock. But she understood the unspoken plea. Do something. Anything. I can attempt to target the gunners, she said, her mouth dry. It would be like shooting at the tip of a needle. The exposed part of the gunner, his head, his shoulders, would be a tiny, fleeting target behind a weapon that was shaking with its own powerful recoil. Do it. She picked the leftmost nest first. The gunner was a blur of motion, feeding belts of ammunition, his body braced against the weapon's thunder. The range was 1,600 meters. Wind from the left. She aimed not at the man, but at the narrow slit between the sandbags where his head appeared and disappeared. She fired. The round sparked off the metal of the gun shield. The gunner flinched, ducked, but after a moment, resumed firing. She had barely inconvenienced him. Frustration, a dangerous emotion, bubbled up. She forced it down. Think, Lena. She observed the pattern. Every 15 seconds or so, the gunner would stop to adjust his aim or change an ammunition box. That was her window, a moment of relative stillness. She loaded a fresh round, her movements mechanical, precise. She watched. The gunner fired a long burst, then stopped. His head came up slightly as he checked his field of fire. Lena's crosshair found the dark spot of his head in the gap. She exhaled. The shot broke. This time, the result was different. The gunner's body slumped forward, limp over his weapon. The secondary gunner behind him yanked the body back and took his place, but the fear was sown. The murderous stream of fire from that nest halted for a precious 30 seconds. One gunner down, she reported, already shifting to the second nest. But the Taliban had learned. The second gunner was now wearing a helmet and kept his head impossibly low. Her first shot at him was ineffective. He would fire in short, unpredictable bursts, then duck completely. He was suppressing himself, but it was still enough to keep the isolated team trapped. Lena knew she was running out of time and options. The enemy was adapting faster than she could engage. Then she noticed something. A young fighter, maybe a teenager, was acting as a runner for the second machine gun nest, bringing up boxes of ammunition from a hidden cache further down the slope. He took a predictable route, scurrying between two specific rocks. She made a calculation. A terrible one. Doc, I'm shifting to the ammunition runner for Nest 2. Doc understood immediately. Targeting a non-shooter, a logistical helper. It was a gray area, ethically and legally, but it was also tactical warfare. No ammunition, no machine gun. He's a combatant, facilitating the fire, Doc said, his voice devoid of judgment. It was an affirmation. She tracked the boy's next run. He darted from cover, a heavy box in his arms. Lena's shot took him in the leg. He went down, screaming, the ammunition box tumbling down the slope. The machine gunner turned, distracted by the cries of his comrade. For a few critical seconds, his attention was divided. In the valley, the isolated team saw their chance. Moving now, their leader yelled over the radio. A smoke grenade bloomed, and the 8 figures scrambled, dragging their wounded back towards the main perimeter under the temporary lull. They made it to a shallow ditch, gaining a marginally safer position. Lena did not watch the runner struggle. She shifted her scope back to the ruins. The commander in the black vest was on a radio now, gesturing violently. He had seen the ripple effect of her actions, the recoilless rifle abandoned, a machine gunner dead, a supply line disrupted. He was no longer just fighting the men in the valley. He was hunting the ghost on the mountain. And, in his furious gestures, he made a mistake. In his anger, he stood up, just for a second, to get a clearer view of the valley. It was less than 2 seconds. But, for Lena, time dilated. Her crosshair found him. The range was extreme, the wind gusting. She had no time for a perfect calculation. It was a snapshot, an instinctive culmination of years of training. She fired. The round struck the stone wall beside the commander's head, showering him with chips of rock. He dropped, unharmed but undoubtedly terrified. He had felt the breath of the ghost. He vanished from view, retreating deeper into the ruins. She had missed, but the message was sent. And down in the valley, a strange sound came over the radio from Eagle Actual. It was almost a laugh. You just made him soil his man-jammy, Ghost. He's rattled. Keep him that way. We're trying to organize a breakout, but we need that command node gone. He's the glue. The pressure was a physical weight on Lena's chest. She had neutralized a cannon, suppressed a machine gun, wounded a runner, and scared a commander. Yet, 381 men were still trapped. The enemy was still strong, still coordinated. And now, they were hunting her with a vengeance. The ghost had become the most wanted person on the battlefield. The missed shot at the commander echoed in Lena's mind, a sharp, metallic ring of failure that vibrated deeper than the gun's actual report. He was alive, angry, and now acutely aware of her lethal attention. The hunt was truly on. Within minutes, the battlefield dynamics shifted again. The Taliban fire became more disciplined, more conserving of ammunition, but also more probing. Long bursts from the remaining heavy machine guns began to walk up the slopes of the mountains opposite the valley. Methodical, searching patterns. They weren't aiming at anything specific. They were trying to flush a bird from the brush. Her bird. They're trying to figure out our angle, Doc whispered, his face pressed to his spotting scope. They know the shot on the commander came from the general direction of these mountains, but we're too far. They'll start with likely positions closer in. A new voice, strained with static and urgency, broke onto their secure frequency. It was a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, JTAC, from a valley, call sign Hammer. Ghost, Hammer. We have a window. The clouds are breaking to the east. We might get fast air in 15, maybe 20 minutes. But we need the target area cleared of friendlies for a bomb run. We need to push the enemy off the central ridge, especially around those ruins. If we can get them to break cover and retreat even a few hundred meters, the jets can sanitize the area. Can you encourage a retreat? Lena understood. She and her rifle were now the anvil. Her precision fire needed to make the enemy on the central ridge feel so unsafe, so targeted, that they would abandon their ideal positions. Then, the hammer of American air power would fall. But it was a desperate gambit. Making a disciplined enemy break required inflicting a level of terror and confusion usually delivered by volume of fire, not single shots. I can try, Hammer, but I need to make them think there's more than one of me. Doc nodded, catching her thought. We need to simulate a sniper team moving and firing from multiple points. Hit and move in their minds. Physically relocating was impossible. It would take too long, and they'd lose all observation. But perception was a weapon. Lena selected a new target. Not a gunner, but a leader. She had spotted a man with a green scarf who seemed to be directing a group of riflemen on the central ridge. He moved with authority. She calculated the shot, 1,550 meters. Steady wind. She aimed high, compensating for the bullet's steep plunge. The shot cracked. Through the scope, she saw the man in the green scarf spin and drop. A hit. She immediately cycled the bolt and, without moving from her position, shifted her aim 300 meters to the left along the same ridge, to a two-man RPG team preparing to fire. She fired again, faster than she normally would. The round impacted the dirt at their feet, causing them to scramble back. Two shots, from two vastly different angles on the ridge, in quick succession. To the enemy below, it would be confusing. Was there a team? Were they flanking? She waited 90 seconds. Let the uncertainty simmer. Then, she targeted the second heavy machine gun nest again, the one with the cautious gunner. She placed a round directly into the armored shield with a sharp spang she imagined she could hear. Another round, aimed at the ammunition cache area, sending a box of loose rounds cooking off in a popping, fiery display. They're talking, Doc reported, listening to the enemy chatter on a separate radio. They're arguing. Some think there's a full sniper team moving along the high ridge. Others think it's just one very good shooter. The commander is yelling at them to stay put. The central ridge was now buzzing with nervous energy. Fighters were glancing over their shoulders, firing random bursts into the empty mountains behind them. The cohesion was fraying, but the commander in the ruins was holding it together through sheer force of will. He was the keystone. Hammer, Ghost. The ridge is nervous, but the boss is still in charge. He's keeping them in place. Copy. Air is 5 minutes out. We need that ridge cleared, Ghost. We're preparing to make our breakout push from the valley the second the bombs hit. It's now or never. A cold clarity settled over Lena. The commander had to die. Not just be suppressed, but die. And he was now completely hidden. She had not seen him since her near miss. The ruins provided perfect cover. She could put 100 rounds into those stones and achieve nothing. She scanned the area around the ruins with desperate intensity. Then she saw it. A tiny flash of light. A reflection. Behind a broken section of wall, partly shielded by a bush, was the corner of a radio's handset or perhaps a binocular lens. The sun, peeking through the breaking clouds, had glinted off it, and just visible holding it was a hand. The commander's hand. He was still there, still commanding, just utterly concealed. It was a shot that belonged in a myth. Over 1,700 meters. At a hand, hitting it would be a miracle, but wounding him might not be enough. He needed to be eliminated. She studied the geometry. The hand was behind a wall. The angle was acute. But the bullet, her high-powered .300 Win Mag round, if it hit the stone at the right spot, would not just stop. It would shatter, sending hypervelocity fragments and stone shards in a lethal cone directly behind the point of impact. It was called a suppressive or area shot. It was not a sure kill. It was a hope, a prayer made of physics and desperation. Document. I have a hand visible behind the west wall of the ruins. I'm going for a ricochet/fragmentation shot on the stone corner at grid. She read the precise coordinate. Doc calculated silently. It's a 1 in 1,000 shot, Lena. Maybe less. It's the only shot we have. She inhaled, the smell of dry earth and cold metal filling her senses. The world narrowed to a single stone at the corner of the ancient wall. She had to hit not the hand, but the specific edge of the rock beside it. A margin of error of less than an inch. She adjusted for the monumental drop, for the wind that had begun to swirl as the weather changed. Her finger rested on the trigger. 5 minutes to air support. 381 lives in the balance. One shot. She didn't hear the roar of the approaching jets still miles away. She didn't hear the intensified fire from the valley as the trapped force prepared for their desperate breakout. All she heard was the whisper of her own breath. She squeezed. The rifle bucked. The bullet flew its long, silent journey. A plume of gray dust and stone chips erupted from the exact corner of the rock she had aimed for. The hand disappeared. For 3 heartbeats, nothing. Then, chaos on a ridge. 2 fighters rushed from behind the ruins, not firing but dragging something. A body. They pulled it back, away from the position, in a panicked retreat. Then, like a dam breaking, other fighters on the central ridge began to fall back. The constant, disciplined fire from that position slackened, then turned into disorganized, covering bursts as they retreated to secondary positions. Command net is going crazy, Doc said, a note of awe in his voice. They're yelling the commander is hit. They're pulling back. Hammer Ghost. Central ridge is clearing. I say again, enemy is retreating from the central ridge. Roger, Ghost. We see it. Jets are inbound. 30 seconds. All elements brace for impact. The roar became a thunder as 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons screamed down the valley, invisible in the high clouds until the last moment. 2 500-pound dams fell with a whispering sigh before impacting the central ridge with cataclysmic force. The earth shook. A giant double cloud of dirt and debris rose into the sky, swallowing the ruins, the trenches, everything. In the valley, the SEALs and commandos erupted from their positions. It was not a retreat. It was a violent, focused charge towards the now-smoking central high ground, their path cleared by fire and fear. The battle had turned, and on a distant ridge, a female sniper named Lena Vance finally allowed herself to tremble, the steel box in her mind bursting open, flooding her with a fatigue so profound it felt like death. But the job wasn't done. The enemy was wounded, not gone, and they would remember the ghost. The twin blasts from the dams rolled across the mountains like the drumbeat of an angry god. From her perch, Lena watched the dense cloud of pulverized rock and smoke slowly rise and begin to drift on the wind. The central ridge, once a bastion of disciplined enemy fire, was now a silent, chaotic scar. The ruins, the trench lines, the machine gun nests, all were gone, consumed in that rolling gray-brown cloud. For a long moment, the very battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The relentless cacophony of gunfire from that sector had ceased, replaced by a ringing, eerie quiet. Then the valley erupted, not with enemy fire, but with the controlled, aggressive movement of the trapped force. 381 men who had been holding on by their fingernails for hours now became a single, unleashed entity. SEAL and Afghan commando assault teams flowed up the slopes of the central ridge like a dark tide, securing the newly created rubble. Their fire was precise, directed at the flanks where stunned Taliban fighters were trying to reorganize. The breakout had begun. In her ear, the radio traffic was a storm of terse, professional calls. Eagle elements, pushing to phase line red. Machine gun nest to the east is still active, suppressing. Medevac, we have a lane. Get those birds in now. The trapped force was no longer trapped. They were taking the fight back. But the battle was far from over. The Taliban force was battered and leaderless on the central ridge, but they were not defeated. The eastern and western ridges were still thick with fighters, and their fire now concentrated with renewed fury on the men advancing through the valley and up the central slope. They knew they had lost the initiative, and their attacks took on a desperate, fanatical edge. Ghost, Hammer, the JTAC's voice came through crisp now. Outstanding work. You broke their spine. Now we need to keep them broken. Air support is on station. 2 more F-16s and an AC-130 gunship is 10 minutes out. We need you to be our guardian angel. The boys are exposed, moving across that valley floor. Any heavy weapons or concentrations you see forming on the flanks, you call them out, and we'll put steel on them. If you have a shot, take it. Lena's body screamed in protest. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the impossible shot was ebbing, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching cold and a tremor in her hand she had to consciously still. She took a long drink of tepid water from her canteen, forcing her mind back into the scope. The guardian angel role was different. It was less about precision surgery and more about sweeping protection. She had to watch over the entire chaotic advance. She and Doc became a rapid-fire observation post. Hammer, concentration of fighters, approximately 15, gathering behind the large boulder at Grid on the eastern ridge. They're preparing a counterattack. Roger, sending them a gift from above. A minute later, a laser-guided rocket from one of the F-16s streaked down and obliterated the boulder. The gathering scattered, broken. She saw a DSHK being repositioned on the western ridge. Heavy machine gun team moving to a new firing position, Grid. A burst of 30mm cannon fire from the arriving AC-130 Spectre gunship, invisible in the sky, sawed through the position before the gun could be set up. Lena also took shots when she could. A Taliban fighter setting up a mortar tube. A leader trying to rally a group behind a rock outcrop. Her shots were less about single, battle-turning miracles now and more about constant, grinding attrition. She was a pebble in their shoe, a persistent, deadly insect they couldn't swat, making every move, every exposure a potential death sentence. Down below, the effects were tangible. The advance, while still dangerous, had momentum. Medevac helicopters, Black Hawks with Red Cross symbols, now dared to dart into the valley, landing in swirling dust under covering fire to evacuate the most critically wounded. Each bird that lifted off, laden with broken bodies, was a small victory in itself. Then, a new threat emerged. Doc spotted it first. Lena, look. Far western ridge, near the tree line. See that? He was pointing at a group of fighters who were not engaging the advancing force. They were looking up, scanning the mountains with binoculars. And they were pointing in the general direction of her and Doc's position. They've triangulated us, Lena said, the cold in her gut returning. The volume and direction of her fire over the past hours, especially the last frantic series of shots, had given them a general fix. A squad of Taliban, perhaps 10 strong, was now detaching from the main fight. Their mission was clear: climb the mountain and silence the sniper. We have company, Lena reported a Hammer. Enemy squad, size 10, moving to our suspected position. We need to displace. Negative, Ghost. Hammer's response was immediate. We are at the most critical phase. The gunship is running dry. The fast movers are rearming. We have a 15-minute gap in close air support. If we lose your eyes now, and they mass for a counter-push, we could lose everything. You have to hold the line. You have to buy us that 15 minutes. The order was unthinkable, yet completely logical. The needs of the 381 outweighed the survival of the two. They were to become bait and anvil all at once. They had to fight off an assault team while simultaneously continuing to direct the battle below. Roger. We'll hold, Lena said, her voice strangely calm. She looked at Document. He gave a grim, tight smile. Well, he said, pulling his M4 rifle closer. Always said this spot needed a better view. They hastily gathered their essential gear, ammo, radios, water, and moved 20 meters back from their primary position to a slightly lower, more defensible rock cluster. It offered better cover from an infantry assault, but a more restricted view of the valley. It was a compromise between surviving the next few minutes and doing their job. Lena set up her rifle facing downslope, towards the likely approach of the enemy squad. Doc took up a position with his M4 and grenades. The wait was agonizing. Every second stretched, filled with the distant booms of the battle below and the whisper of the wind. Lena split her attention, glancing through her scope down the mountain, then swiveling to use her rifle's powerful optic to scan the valley, calling out one last target. A technical with a heavy machine gun to a departing F-16. Then, movement. A flicker of brown fabric between rocks, 800 meters down the slope. Then another. They were coming, using the terrain expertly. Lena took a deep breath. This was a different kind of shooting. Shorter range, moving targets under the threat of immediate return fire. She centered her crosshair on a figure sprinting between two boulders. She led him slightly. The shot took him in the chest. He fell. The advance halted momentarily. But these were not conscripts. They were seasoned, motivated fighters on a holy mission to kill the sniper. They returned fire. Rounds snapped overhead and ricocheted off the rocks around them with sharp whines. Lena and Doc ducked. The fight for their own lives had begun. For the next 10 minutes, it was a brutal, close-range duel. Lena would pop up, take a single, aimed shot, and duck as a hail of AK-47 fire answered. Doc used his grenade launcher to lob rounds into suspected hiding spots, forcing the enemy to move. They were a team, a perfect, desperate dance. Lena dropped 2 more fighters. Doc's grenades wounded another. But the enemy kept coming, crawling, flanking. They were now within 300 meters. Close enough for accurate rifle fire. A round clipped the rock by Lena's head, sending stone fragments stinging into her cheek. We're running out of real estate, Doc, she yelled over the gunfire. 2 more minutes, he shouted back, reloading. The gunship should be back on station. The enemy launched a final, desperate rush. For fighters broke cover, firing on full automatic as they charged up the steep slope. Lena shot the lead runner. Doc cut down a second with his rifle. But the other 2 kept coming, screaming. Lena worked her bolt, fired again. Missed. Her hands were slick with sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. The third fighter raised his rifle directly at her. A sound like the ripping of the world's largest canvas filled the sky. A stream of red tracers, thick as ropes, descended from the heavens. The 105mm howitzer on the AC-130 gunship had spoken. The entire mountainside below their position vanished in a line of cataclysmic explosions. When the dust cleared, the assaulting squad was simply gone. The sudden silence was deafening. Lena and Doc looked at each other, breathing in ragged gasps, coated in dust and sweat. Hammer to Ghost. You still with us? We're here, Lena managed. Good. Because it's over. They're breaking. All across the line. The birds are coming in to extract the main force. Your job is done, Ghost. It's done. Lena lowered her head onto the stock of her rifle. She didn't feel triumph. She felt hollow, spent, and old. Below, the valley was now fully under friendly control. Helicopters swarmed like dragonflies, lifting the exhausted, victorious men to safety. The 381 were getting out. She watched them go, one by one, until the valley was empty of everything but the debris of war and the fading smoke. She and Doc were the last to leave, picked up by a little bird helicopter that skimmed the ridge. As they lifted off, Lena looked back at the Devil's Anvil, now silent. She had fired the shot that turned the battle, but as the helicopter banked away, carrying her from the mountain, she knew the true weight of that day would never leave her. It was a weight measured not in the enemy she had felled, but in the brother she had helped bring home. And in the quiet of the rotor's beat, she finally let the tears come for all of it.